chairperson for today's function, Dr. Patrick Ewea, the provosts, deans, heads of department, faculty, distinguished invited guests, the Akua Donkor family, the former Minister of State for Agriculture, who is here with us, the former Director General for Ghana Health Service, Professor Kwesi, who is here also, the Vice Chancellor for UNIMAC, University of Media, Arts and Communications, students, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for honoring our invitation to attend this lecture. It comes about after a very calm reflection on the demise of an ambitious woman, Akua Donkor, who 3 times sought the highest office of the land, the presidency of the Republic, and died in the process. This was a woman of very high ambition, affable, fearless, a high achiever in local politics, but also perceived as a pet object of play, only because she was an illiterate woman in a lifelong search for a position for which we know satisfied all constitutional requirements to be president. In the midst of the widespread skepticism and denigration, she kept knocking on the doors of the Electoral Commission to upload or unload a burden on her mind. October 2024, a highly publicized meeting was convened by the Inter-Party Advisory Committee, IPAC, with the Electoral Commission to discuss pressing issues on the impending national elections. This was attended largely by presidential candidates or their representatives. At this IPAC meeting, Akua Donkor has 0 proficiency in English, which was the official medium of interaction there, was not a deterrent, since she had translation assistance from her secretary. She sat with calm confidence and with some help keenly followed discussions on illegal voter transfers, a bloated voters register, and so on and so forth. After several failed attempts to catch the glimpse of the moderator, Akua Donkor eventually had her turn, grabbed the microphone, and in a shrill voice rattled her entire submission in fluent Twi. But her speech soon tapered off and yielded to an impatient moderator behind her who appeared uncomfortable with the vernacular intrusion. Attacks on Akua Donkor in the social media on her intervention were not unexpected. Here's a sample. Useless, villager, illiterate, cassava thief. Her brain has gone insane. She drinks galamsey water, ugly witch, menopause trance, foolish woman, agbalema cassava, and other unprintable garble. Partly outraged, I picked my pen and did a post on my Facebook wall entitled President Akua Donkor, narrating her journey, the issues she had raised, and lamenting the social media attacks on her. I pleaded that she be given a listening ear in a multilingual Ghana with predominant literacy and low proficiency in the English language. It did not really matter if her agenda appeared to negate trends in education, literacy, democracy, technology that were in accord with the prevailing global order. Her lone voice could indeed represent a silent majority otherwise paralyzed by an imposed world order that promotes Western cultures and jettisons all other knowledges. In the course of preparations towards the 2024 elections came the sad news of her sudden demise, which aroused a blend of grief, but also relief in some quarters. I even heard there was jubilation among a section of her political opponents. That was 3 weeks after my Facebook post. An idea then struck me Since I had already been tracking the theme of non-literacy in governance for a while now, how about a public lecture in her memory that raises broader issues, the silent voices of the unlettered who are not proficient in English, the official language of governance? Happily, the Ashesi University warmly welcomed the suggestion to stir a public debate on the issue. We could also lend a dimension to the pet theme of leadership, governance, and democracy. In this lecture, I present case studies of leaders with limited or zero literacy, who, despite their condition, significantly impacted society and our policy. Those with little or no education, who nevertheless had a vision for going to school and ensured that future generations would benefit from the opportunities that they missed. Finally, how society has coped with the ordeal of non-literacy within contemporary governance. In Ghana, literacy is rather parochially associated with English only. The truth being that there's a fairly widespread literacy in Ghanaian languages among several older Ghanaians who may be illiterate in English but literate in their respective local languages. Finally, I look at the profile of academic certification within Ghana's legislature, particularly during the Fourth Republic. Towards this project, I took a trip to the umbilical foundations of Akua Donkor, her hometown of Ejuritia in the Kwabere district of Ashanti, entered her compound house, identified her room door, and had a relaxed chat with her family and lineage. I needed from the lineage more information about the vision of a woman who attracts a blend of play, amusement, sympathy, but also derision, scorn, and even abuse. My visit was in February, weeks ahead of a burial last weekend. Born in 1952, Akua Donkor was a farmer and fairly prosperous woman who did not have the privilege of formal education, partly because her parents took her to distant farmlands when she was young. She was the last born of 3 siblings, none of whom went to school. Her parents neither. As a magnanimous woman, virtually everyone in the lineage was her child. She had indeed taken care of a good number of sisters' children. Her interest in politics was piqued as far back as 1990s. In the local assembly, she became the assemblywoman for Ejuritia community in 2004 and made a huge impact on infrastructure development in the Kwabere district using her own resources. She put up a market at Emai, gave them potable water, constructed and renovated community schools, provided electricity, toilet facilities in neighboring towns. Even where a courthouse had been constructed, she felt duty-bound to provide furniture as a contribution. Based on tremendous achievements in the local government area, Akua Donkor succeeded in becoming the women's organizer for the local NDC, and in 2010 contested in the NDC parliamentary candidature for Fija, but lost narrowly. She joined the Progressive People's Party, founded by Kwesi Yankah in 2012, but left and founded her own party, the Ghana Freedom Party. She was known for her courage, fearlessness, candor, and dogged persistence. Despite her illiteracy, Akua Donkor had the courage to insist on face-to-face encounters with various presidents of Ghana: J.J. Rawlings, J. Kufuor, Jonathan Mills, John Mahama, Nana Akufo-Addo. In 2013, she traveled with President Mahama to Italy and was also invited by the NDC to be part of the Senchi Economic Forum. Despite her literacy, Akua Donkor knew the value of education and sponsored several children through high school and beyond. She also secured a large tract of land for various educational projects. But her interest transcended secondary to tertiary education. she envisioned establishing a university in her hometown, Ingenuity, for which she reserved a huge portion of land. That's the land reserved for the establishment of a university. She indeed looked forward to an Akua Donkor University. The vision led to the erection of a conspicuous signboard at the proposed site, meant to ward off trespassers. Excellence Akua Donkor University land. And no, keep off. Madam Donkor became the role model for women in the locality, some of whom were sufficiently motivated to participate in local governance and enter politics. Her highest vision in seeking to be president, however, was to use a high executive position to legislate the use of local languages, first in parliament, and extend this to other arms of government. She was so passionate that not only did she speak Twi at all IPAC meetings, she would silence any member of her delegation who sought to contribute to IPAC discussions in English. She indeed was quoted as saying, "There is no prosperous country in the world today that abandoned their own language and used others." She often cited China and Germany as using their languages to climb to higher heights. That way, democracy would be more meaningful. Ordinary people would actively participate in debate and also understand issues debated. Discussing this particular issue with the Akua Donkor's family on my visit, they were very passionate and lamented that many people in their community were entirely at a loss, understanding, for example, the recent midnight brawl at the ministerial meeting, where chairs were thrown and public property destroyed. All they saw on television was total confusion in the legislature for reasons that were unclear to them. But they noted one positive development in this ninth parliament, which would have gladdened the heart of their departed mother. There's a viral video of Mr. Ohene Kwame Frimpong, Member of Parliament for Asante Achim North, who in February, a few weeks ago, got permission from the speaker to speak in Twi. Let's hear a little bit of this.
Asante Achim, eh?
Asante Achim, yes.
Asante Achim North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to stand by Order 631 of the Standing Order and bring my contribution in the local language, Twi.
Order
633.
Are you going to do the interpretation in English?
Yes, I can do that, yeah.
If you can do that, but why do you want to do it in Twi?
My constituents have told me severally that they want to hear or understand most of what we speak about in Parliament in the local language. So if I can indulge you on that, I would really appreciate it.
Is that so?
Yes, please. Right. Mr. Speaker, Didin Kameda Yunyaba Aye Felicia Ajay Sir Ode and some here we are today. Now, kakra me pese me kan yakwan enye dodona enye ewo Ghana ha and afi ye street lights ye maame no eka bebre efa tourism ho ye nim sene tourism eboa krubia sene itimide sika eba ema economy no emu epija. Now,
this is a gentleman and MP for Asante Achim North who sought permission from the speaker on prevailing standing orders, and her entire submission was in Twi, after which she translated to English. This rare development in itself was considered enough to vindicate their mother, who should indeed have a restful sleep. They expressed the hope that more legislators will follow the pace set and speak local languages to reverse the impression that members of parliament win votes with the local language and thereafter turn their backs on their people. It is like building bridges to win votes and thereafter replacing the bridges with barriers. Nana Akua the first. The issue of non-literate leaders with a vision for schooling brings to mind the first chief of a small town, Akua, in the central region, who was non-literate, but in 1929 found the first privately owned national school in the Gold Coast, the Akua National School, which attracted students from all over the Gold Coast. The school offered free tuition and used host families to house visiting students. The founder, Nana Akua the first, who was chief from 1913 to 1948, had no formal education. He was stark illiterate. The importance of literacy as indispensable in sustainable development has not been lost on contemporary society. It is not surprising that since independence, governments in Ghana have initiated various schemes aimed at accelerating development through free and compulsory education, including non-formal education. Basic literacy, however, should be distinguished from functional literacy, where the basic skills in reading and writing are put to day-to-day use to improve the standard of living. In Ghana today, the non-literacy rate is estimated as 30.2%, but higher among the female population, with 34.4%. The figure could be more staggering with reference to functional literacy, or the day-to-day use of literacy to enhance the quality of life. Barriers to formal education are multiple and range from social, cultural, and economic factors, and may also depend on overarching national policies introduced by respective governments. Yet there are signs that some conservatives see formal education or see informal education the quickest route to cultural alienation. Listen to the story of the late Bafwa Koto, a leading vanguard of Ashanti activism, whose son is with us today. He comes from Hemai, next to Akua Donkor's Edretia. Ochami Bafwa Koto was the longest-serving Ochami or spokesman for the Ashanti realm until his death. He served 3 successive kings of Ashanti over a cumulative period of 68 years until he died in 2002. The 3 kings he served, Ananosa Ajimanprempe II, Otumfuo Pokuwari, and the current king of Ashanti, Otumfuo Setutu II. I got to know his tremendous impact and leadership in the Ashanti royal domain during my extensive postdoctoral research on royal rhetoric through the Menchia Palace. He was a supreme guardian of Ashanti culture and values. He was mentor, philosopher, diplomat, orator, counselor. Until 1959, Bafwa doubled as a nationalist, politician, and the founder of NLM, the famed National Liberation Movement, the most formidable opposition to Nkrumah's CPP. His party teamed up with others like the Northern People's Party to become the United Party, out of which the New Patriotic Party eventually emerged. It attracted elites like Buzia, J.B. Danko, and so on. Bafwa Koto was arrested and jailed in 1959 under Nkrumah's Preventive Detention Act, along with 7 others. In spite of all skills and knowledge that he marshaled to found a strong opposition party embracing the elite, Bafwa Koto was himself illiterate. He never went to school. He had 36 children and significantly sent all of them to school except 1. Many of them could not proceed beyond basic school after Daddy was imprisoned. Significantly, he flew from Ghana to Cambridge, England in 1985 to proudly witness the doctoral graduation of his son and 18th born, Dr. Usu Afuya Koto, who is here with us today, Ghana's former Minister for Agriculture. In one of my encounters with Bafwa, it occurred to me to ask him why he did not go to school. His answer perplexed me. He said, "Me papa say me go school and me won't tell." My father said, if I went to school, I would die an early death. Since Balfour lived up to the good old age of 98, his father probably stands vindicated. Reasons for resisting a deep immersion in formal education also reminds me of another local sage, Nana Kwame Ampedu, that many of you would know, the well-known Ghanaian singer philosopher who died in 2021 at 76, as to why he did not go beyond the basic school, even though he was a whiz-kid. Nana reminded me of a proverb spoken by his father in response to that question. His father said, when your grazing sheep have not returned from the pastures, you don't add to their numbers. Further Western education given to his siblings yielded nothing but alienation of the mind and disrespect for indigenous values. The image of the lost sheep here depicts the pursuit of materialism away from home, resulting in a final loss of identity and self-worth. There are similar cases in Senegal, where one powerful yet illiterate woman in the National Assembly explained why she did not go to school. She said, our people, the Labos, did not want girls to enroll in school. School was a waste. It was thought to corrupt one's soul with cunning and trickery. It was a place one could learn to win without being right. Unquote. Traditionalists have found they've been very careful not to confuse formal education with wisdom. Much as school-going broadens knowledge and confers power and authority, it cannot be a substitute for street wisdom. The Akan have a saying that school nko, nyanse nko. Formal education is distinctly different, and wisdom is different as well. Wisdom as a basic equipment for living cannot be simply acquired by going to school. Education and wisdom are two distinct entities, not to be wrongly equated. Let me draw attention also to the stigma often associated with orality within the context of literacy in the contemporary world. Orality without writing is often associated with non-intelligence, poverty, ignorance, superstition, which have all been targeted for elimination. No wonder predominantly oral cultures like ours are also the wretched of the earth. The notion is so entrenched that the concept of an oral intellectual is not possible. An intellectual has to be literate, according to this view, because a people without writing are incapable of abstract reasoning and analytical thinking. This is a very parochial view which African scholars have taken to task. The same negative attitude extends to language, where scholarship is no scholarship unless it is expressed in a Euro-American language, English, French, German, Italian, and their literatures. These are the cultures of scholarship and are critical in learning how the world operates. The power of this knowledge leads to the trivialization of all other knowledges, compelling people to doubt their own wisdom if the wisdom that they have and the others' wisdom has not been expressed or articulated in educational institutions in the West. There are several scholars today who almost by default would rule out any respectable thesis or dissertation in Ebe or Yoruba or Akan. It cannot be scholarship. Simply on the basis of the language or meta-language used. But translate the same Yoruba discourse into an Euro-American language, and that cross-linguistic rendition suddenly propels it to the realm of academia. Such negative reaction to African languages is indeed a paradox, because within our own local settings, we have pride in the superiority of our local languages over Western languages. Consider the profuse apologies we render when we seek to switch from local English to English in the local setting. In the formal settings, we profusely apologize and say, elders, with due respect, may srema puto. Elders, I hereby plead with profuse apologies to mix or adulterate or contaminate the purity of my communication with English. With the same logic, we downgrade English, sometimes referred to English as potokasa. In local terms, potokasa literally means impure language, language that does not satisfy my ego. Mixed, tainted, stained, deprived of purity. A switch from Akan to English then is depicted in traditional terms as an act of debasement, defiling the purity and sanctity of language me poto, and mixing, contaminating the purity of my language with an undesired language. Pride in indigenous heritage as superior or quintessential is often an exercise in linguistic nationalism. The issue of non-literates or semi-literates in government is brought into sharper focus within the regime of Kwame Nkrumah and the CPP. This is very important, that had a special niche for ordinary men and women, and indeed had many government officials within officialdom who were semi-literate. The concept of the veranda boys comes to mind. In political engagements with the masses, the veranda paradigm was most crucial for the purpose of mobilization and identifying with the majority illiterates. Such activists may be illiterate, semi-literate, or products of basic school education, but for practical purposes were considered critical in enhancing the functions of government or a party because they had forensic skills and were embodiments of street wisdom associated with the masses. In Ghana's political history, such personalities have thrived most in governments that espouse grassroots ideologies like the CPP, PNDC, NDC, and so on and so forth. CPP, of course, current CPP, they are typical examples. One name that stands out, symbolizing the resilience of the ordinary man in contemporary governance and leadership, is Krobo Edusei. The older ones would know, Moke. The folk hero among Nkrumah's frontline politicians, indeed the quintessential example of the veranda metaphor. He was part of Nkrumah's first post-independent cabinet, known for his wit, high sense of humor, and pedestrian logic. Krobo Edusei was the least educated among Nkrumah's ministers, yet the most popular. It is to him credit is given for Nkrumah's survival and relative success in the Ashanti region. Krobo Edusei was born in 1915 at Ampabani, a village in the Kwabre district, once again near Akua Donkor. He entered politics from the streets. He held a basic school leaving certificate and became a member of the first central committee of the CPP when the party was formed in 1949. At the general elections in 1951, he was elected as member of the Legislative Assembly, representing Kumasi Northwest, and became the chief whip of the CPP. Most significant are controversial utterances attributed to Krobo Edusei on party platforms, as well as his skills in reducing simple practical terms and concepts that could confuse the ordinary man. It is to Krobo Edusei that is credited the most pedestrian definition of socialism, a term he simply translated into broken English as one man no chore. Quietly opposed to socialism, he was said to have later defined African socialism as Dibima Mindibi, virtually an ideology that permits turn-taking, or rather fairness in the embezzlement of state resources. He parodied the same ideology, seeking to make socialism compatible with wealth acquisition. According to him, socialism doesn't mean if you have made a lot of money, you cannot spend it. in seeking to portray the power of the CPP-dominated parliament. Krobo Edusei made yet another of his famous utterances, boasting that the CPP-dominated parliament is very powerful, said that the CPP can do anything except change a man into a woman. To characterize Krobo Edusei's education as modest is not necessarily to debase his street logic and wisdom, and neither can one take for granted Edusei's modest proficiency in English and his active participation in parliament. On public platforms, he spoke Twi. His limited education, of course, could not make him a prolific writer. Even though literate, he did not hide his limited proficiency in the writing of English, and sometimes sought help from colleagues. An experienced diplomat, now no more, K.B. Asante, was occasionally traveling on trips with Krobo Edusei. And in his words, I interacted with him several times. He was sensible. He knew his limitations, and if you were good, reasonable, and you respected him, you would get on well with him. For example, I traveled with him and sometimes knew that pressmen would be there to interview him. You sat with him on the plane, and when the plane was about to land, he would say, "Oh, now you're cratchy, bibi mami. It's you who are well educated, please write something for me." So you write a short speech and read the speech to him. He reads it back carefully to you, and you tell him the answers to give when he arrives and they ask him questions. The plane lands and they interview him. He reads the statement, and after he has finished and the pressmen ask questions, Krobo Edusei tells them, ask my secretary. Not in my secretary. Occasionally, the limited education of Krobo Edusei and the Veranda boys became a subject of innuendo, particularly among the opposition in parliament, who were elite. Anytime this happened, Krobo Edusei would effectively retort, making allusions to his own limited education. Listen to Krobo Edusei on 21st of January 1957, on the second reading of the IDC Amendment Bill, when the MP for Secretary West had criticized the appointment of members to the statutory boards. Krobo Edusei said, the honorable member said the CPP government does not appoint intelligent members to serve on statutory committees. I am surprised at this because Mr. J.C. Akosa is supposed to be one of the most intelligent persons in this constituency, and I dare say in the realm of practical economics, he has no peer in the country. None among the opposition can face him. As I said, honorable members of the opposition always think that when you are not a BL or PhD or a BSc and so forth, he's not qualified to be a director of a company. And listen to Krobo Edusei in 1958, when they were debating the constitutional proposals. Honorable member for Jabi is my elder brother. I don't want to say anything to disgrace him, but I just want to tell him that as far as practical common sense is concerned, I am 20 times better than him. I have not had secondary education. I'm an elementary school scholar, and some honorable members here also are. I did not have the opportunity to go to a secondary school, but nobody in this country was born stupid. Everybody has some basic knowledge. But if one does not get the chance, then one is looked down upon. But if I had had secondary education and continued with my studies in the UK and returned, I would have been one of the best lawyers in the country. That's Krobo Edusei. On the language that Krobo Edusei spoke, it is fair to remark that his favorite language was Twi in Parliament, in which he made most of his humorous and controversial statements, either on the campaign platform or in personal encounters. In Parliament, according to C.K. Tedam, one of the old-time politicians who passed on, Krobo Edusei was largely speaking English in the official language of Parliament. He said, where necessary, he spoke Pidgin, but Krobo drifted occasionally from English to Twi where the need arose, and particularly when he sought to achieve maximum effect on burning political issues. He said sometimes his remark in Parliament was framed entirely in Twi, and this often brought in the Speaker, who would insist that Krobo Edusei should translate the statement into English. But there were few people in Parliament in the late 50s who spoke little or no English at all, according to C.K. Tedab, who belonged to the UP tradition. One such was a driver called Apiedu, whom the CPP put up during a by-election in 1959 to contest the Amloga seat after Modesto Apalu of the NLM had been arrested along with Bapakoto and detained. The CPP contestant who won and who had not been to school spoke no English. In Parliament, whenever he sought to contribute, the Speaker, who grew fond of him, would ask, "Mr. Apiedu, can you speak English?" To which he responded, "Mr. Speaker, I speak, which eventually became his nickname, Mr. I Speak. But with reference to national forums, let me refer to this Fourth Republic, which has featured a few such personalities with limited literacy and proficiency in English. One such is the lady we find there, alias Amase. She was MP for Akwetia 2017 to 2020, who at the polls beat her opponent, who was a lawyer, by a margin of nearly 6,000 votes. She held the basic school certificate only and was a hairdresser. During the campaign for elections, she was the subject of ridicule by her opponents due to her limited schooling. But she promised her supporters that she was willing to learn if given the mandate. 3 months into Parliament, Mercy made a huge effort and read her maiden speech. Before I play a snippet of her speech, let me provide the general educational background of members of that particular Parliament. That was the 7th Parliament of the Fourth Republic, where Mercy spoke. In 2017, that Parliament had 275 members, 245 or 89% of whom had at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent. Of those with a bachelor's degree, 6.12% had PhDs and 61.6% had a master's or postgraduate certificate or degree. University diploma holders were 4.3% and high school certificate holders were 3%. Others amounting to 3.1% had unclear academic certificates. Mercy was the only one in that Parliament who had the basic middle school leaving certificate at the highest qualification. Here, part of her maiden speech.
The inauguration brought great hope to the people of Akwetia and the constituents whose fortunes have, since large-scale mining began in 1924, been linked with mining in the town. Mr. Speaker, for the people of Akwetia, the beginning of the operations by DCDJL was an important landmark in the mining industry in Akwetia and in Ghana, and that is showed the coming back of large-scale mining, which would bring progress, jobs, and prosperity to Akwetia and Ghana at large.
Let's give Mercy a round of applause. To this maiden speech, she received mixed reactions. Partly congratulations for the effort she made, but she also was ridiculed for her halting presentation. She understood the challenge that she faced, and she would not give up learning. In a later interview, Mercy said, "I am very sad that people are laughing at me, but I'm proud of myself." She was warmly congratulated, on the other hand, by the Women's Caucus in Parliament. A very important epoch when education and literacy posed major challenges in public policy was the making of the current constitution, during the deliberations of the Consultative Assembly in 1991. The Consultative Assembly was made up of 258 representatives of various recognizable groups. The recognized bodies that formed the Assembly and the various representation quotas given them by the PNDC government became the focus of intense debate due to its palpable bias towards the local class. The PNDC, in tune with its concept of grassroots democracy, ensured that higher quotas of representation were given to pro-government grassroots organizations at the expense of elite and professional bodies. Now, I want to highlight the communication issues that confronted the 1991 Consultative Assembly and the coping mechanisms adopted to mitigate the problem. For those who were illiterate in English with only modest proficiency, the handicaps were considerable. For all communication was in English, so were all official documents, including standing orders, agenda, business papers, and record of proceedings. Illiteracy in English was thus a severe handicap, and for the few at the assembly who were completely illiterate or spoke little English, the problem was real. Coupled with the low level of education, illiterates had a double handicap of neither understanding the medium of communication nor comprehending the issues raised. Unlike the situation in Parliament, the problem was partly solved when the state for the first time made available provision for simultaneous translation into Akan, Ga, and Dagbani of all contributions in English, using experienced translators from the Information Services Department. Help with translation was not obtained from formal source only. According to one member of the Assembly, who was a representative of the Ghana Registered Nurses Association, she sometimes translated documents into illiterates for those who sat close by her. But there was occasionally a way out for such unlettered people. Having obtained a business agenda for the week, the official translator sometimes made it a point to explain the documents to relevant illiterates outside the formal forum. One woman from Kumasi was said to have made an attempt to speak in English. It was, however, pidgin, and she could not make her point well. She was later advised to speak Twi, and when she did, she sounded brilliant. Her name was Madame Abnatia, alias Gloria Prempe. She obtained her middle school certificate in 1964 and was representing the market women of Ashanti, Eastern and Brong-Ahafo regions at the Consultative Assembly. She was later a member of the CIBA, Council of Independent Business Association, and also vice chairman of the Ashanti region branch. At the Consultative Assembly, Abnatia said she did not encounter any problem owing to the presence of translators who translated into Ghanaian languages. Then this enabled her to contribute to debates. These are her own words, spoken in Twi. When we went to the assembly, none of us illiterates felt shy or embarrassed. Anytime I did not understand something in English, I would not hesitate to seek explanation from the well-educated. Sometimes I was a source of fun and laughter, particularly among the men. Anytime I rose to speak, I began by warning the entire assembly that me dear me a market woman, ejum na me ejuma, enti twi na meka. I'm a market woman, it's at the market I work, so it's Twi I'm going to speak. And I can assure you that I did not make any wasteful contribution. I made a good impression, even if I made a wrong statement or what, I did not feel embarrassed. Let me here put it on record that Madame Abnatia on 21st January 1992 contributed to the debate on the representation on the National Security Council, advocating that National Council of Women and Development should be represented. On 5th December 1991, she also contributed to discussions on the supremacy of the Constitution and spoke on the adverse consequences of coup d'etat and how to prevent them. She spoke in Twi and received applause. Yet another woman, Miss Elizabeth Owusu, spoke Akan on the term of the presidency. And in October 1991, Mrs. Grace Opoku represented the market women of Accra, spoke Ga, contributing to the debate on the general principles of constitutional proposals. Despite the facilities for translation at the Assembly, all was not well, since mere translation without further explanation of issues was not enough. There was evidence that the thrust of the proceedings was sometimes lost on the illiterates, and this led to occasional incidents on the floor of the Assembly. The following incident was narrated by a consultative Assembly member to us. In his words, among the illiterates, the most classic example of discomfort appeared to be the representative of the Butchers Association of Ghana. He topped the list of absentees. He made just a few appearances and would disappear for weeks. A translator was brought from Tamale to assist him in following the proceedings in Dagbani, but it did not help. An embarrassing moment came during the voting on chiefs in partisan politics. Not proficient in English, he appeared not to know what was going on. We were voting as to whether to entrench the clause prohibiting chiefs from active participation in politics. The gentleman did not stand up when his roll was being counted in the voting. Apparently, he did not know what was going on. He remained seated during both sides of the counting. Then someone bent over and whispered in his ears. But it was too late. Counting on his roll was over. But he did not give up. He hobbled his way down to join the new row in order to vote against the retrenchment clause. It was not known whether or not he succeeded in doing so or whether he was passing off. From this account go enormous possibilities of disenfranchisement of whole constituencies through illiteracy or the lack of proficiency in the medium of communication, chronic absenteeism, or ill preparation for parliamentary proceedings. The language problem at the national level takes a different turn at the district level, where the language policy is determined by local circumstances and the prevailing sociolinguistic situation. In any case, the directive principles of state policy of 1992 Constitution commits the state to ensuring maximum participation in governance. To ensure this, the language policy has differed from one locality to the other. Cosmopolitan assemblies using more than one language at the assembly and smaller assemblies using the predominant local language. In all cases, English or a mixture of English and the local language has been a common feature, even while English remains the written language. The blend of English and local languages has carved out various blends and even produced politicians at the district level that have been celebrated for their ingenuity in Ghanaian English coinages. Two examples are this Kwame Kwachi of old in the Odan Birim district in the days of the CPP during the 1960s. And in most recent times, Bernard Enchibu Esiakun woon to me. In the case of Mr. Kwame Kwachi, who dropped out of basic school, his public utterances and peculiar Ghanaian English coinages made him a folk hero in the 1960s and beyond, squarely fitting the principles and grassroots of orientation of the CPP. Kwame Kwachi was very articulate in Achim, was indeed uncomfortable with English, and was known for peculiar coinages involving on-the-spot transliteration of Chi into English. He left behind a rich legacy of Ghanaian English expressions that sank readily into oral traditions and became sites of jokes and humor. Today, many of his Ghanaian English coinages are known throughout the country, including others for which he was not responsible, but still stand in his name. His coinages include an attempt that was once made anytime he was representing Kwame Nkrumah, or an attempt that he made to make the point that Nkrumah is important for everybody. He said, if not Kwame Nkrumah, then me, I am the who. All of you, you are the where. In other words, if it wasn't for Kwame Nkrumah, who would I be? And you, where would you be? And on one occasion, when he was representing Kwame Nkrumah in an event that Kwame Nkrumah could not attend, he said, I stand here in the leg of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, with the Kwame Nkrumah name. And finally, when he visited somebody and the person was not home, he left a message with the boy at home. When your father comes, please tell him Kwame Kwachi passes away. In other words, Kwame Kwachi betrayed. And so on and so forth. But we cite the example of Kwame Kwachi also to celebrate the ingenuity of a public official encumbered with English as the official language of government business. An ingenious response was the creative deformation of the Queen's English to deflate its bloated profile as a mode of resistance. It reminds me of a contemporary equivalent of Ghanaian politics, of this gentleman who is literate in English, but is noted for peculiar English diction. Bernard Entribo Siakwala's word to me, chairman of the Ashanti Regional Branch of the NPP. What to me is a secondary school product with average proficiency in English, whose peculiar blend of Twi and English, as well as malapropisms, produce comic relief among his following. A great advocate of local language use, he boasts of fluency in the Queen's language, whose vocabulary he sometimes battles to articulate. Indeed, before he speaks at any political rally, he openly seeks from his audience advice on which language to use. Which language should I speak? Is it Twi or English? And the unanimous response is often English, since people simply enjoy hearing him speak English.
Then His Excellency Nana Dudakwa Akufo-Addo choose Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia as his running mate. 60 years today, the same history is going to introduce in this park. The job would also not have been complete without the effort of all and sundry. Complete without the effort of all and sundry. Whom am I? Whom am I? Whom am I? Choboy, the Minister of Education is here, so I'm going to speak English. Choboy, as usual, as we have conglomerated here,
sports or say any pam you know kramuntimi translate together some did. Yeah. But Ghana says here me no say ko I friend say +2 ko +2 na ko I friend say me senior baby Canada Japan I who your friend say Banas na ko fie fufuo. What you say menya committee me abo so many places na ko makio Kokore say enipa yatrasie na yedidi kofiafiabu na kokore say Ghana ha say enam sese papa Akufo-Addo ayenti no now no still no we are still conglomerating and agglomerating eating what you say and doing things together.
Let's clap for Utili. Let's clap for him. An important factor in any democratic governance is the vehicle of participation, largely language. Apart from exercising his or her franchise through voting, the individual needs the vehicle of language to inform and express his needs and opinion. Article 21 of the Constitution of Ghana guarantees freedom of speech and expression. But the Constitution also acknowledges Ghana's multilingual realities and the restricted access to the official language through certain clauses that compel the provision of language assistance in situations where the human rights violations are imminent. Article 14.2 of the Constitution states, for example, that a person who is arrested, restricted, or detained shall be informed immediately, listen, in a language that he understands, of the reasons of his arrest, restriction, or detention. Similarly, Article 19.2d says a person charged with criminal offense shall be informed immediately in a language that he understands and in detail of the nature of the offense charged, and be permitted to have, without payment by him, the assistance of an interpreter where he cannot understand the language used at the trial. The Constitution thus gives guidelines on the state's role in ensuring that Ghana's multilingualism and high illiteracy do not hinder access to fundamental human rights. Apart from these languages is English, the colonial language, which is the most powerful medium of communication used as an official language, but it is spoken by a minority of the local population as a second language. In Ghana, the language of education and government business is English. Indeed, employers and universities in Ghana demand a pass in English at the SSS level, without which one has little or no future in continuing formal education or getting employment in the public sector. The laws and constitutions of Ghana are in English, and English is also the language of parliament and the language of the courts. In the popular and practical sense, the main index of education is one's ability to speak English, just as literacy is wrongly equated with the ability to read and write English. This naturally excludes from the higher social class several Ghanaians and Africans who are literate in or learned to read and write African languages either through formal schooling or through mass or adult literacy. But so long as one is not equipped with the skills and proficiency in the colonial language, one is termed illiterate, with all its derogatory connotations. Subsequently, the exercise of free speech in certain public forums might be restricted to those who possess the ability to speak, read, and write English. The truth is that if all transactions, particularly in politics and governance, take place in a language that a majority of the people don't understand, one need not impose censorship laws. Censorship is in itself need not be an overt legislative instrument constraining the right to free speech. It has been observed that the more subtle and pervasive type of censorship is structural or systemic. It consists in any public policy use that is implicitly exclusionary and condemns a majority of the people to silence. Communication in Parliament since independence has been in the colonial language. This naturally diminishes the pool of qualified legislators as well as stakeholder participation in governance, restricting these to a minority who are functionally literate in English. The current Constitution of Ghana does not require English proficiency as a criterion for representation in Parliament. Of all Ghana's constitutions, it is those of 1969 and 79 that specify the language of Parliament at the level of proficiency required to be a member of Parliament. Now, 1969 Constitution says, subject to the provision of this article, a person shall be qualified to be a member of the Assembly if he is able to read the English language with a degree of proficiency sufficient to enable him to take an active part in the proceedings. And the 1979 Constitution is similarly worded. The current Constitution, 1992, on the other hand, does not contain any clause on language. The issue of language in Parliament comes up in the standing orders of Parliament. It, for instance, states elsewhere that the proceedings of Parliament shall ordinarily be conducted in the English language, except that a member may exercise the option to address the House in either Akan, Nzima, Ga, Ebe, Hausa, Dagbani, Dagari, or in any other language, provided facilities in the House provided there are facilities in the House for interpretation. That's important. Elsewhere, the standing orders of Parliament convey this without specifying the indigenous language used. On the other hand, the onus of translation has sometimes been put on the parliamentarian himself or herself. According to the official book of Parliament, it says, English is the main language used in Parliament. In case a member finds it necessary to mention a word or phrase or sentence in any of the local languages, he may be required to translate it to the understanding of all. Also, a member may decide to speak in any local language, provided a facility in the House exists for its interpretation. The proviso specified here is very big and flexible enough for political purposes. Not only does it not specify the agency responsible for translation, it is quiet on the implications of the absence of the required translation facilities. Listen to this, another page in Parliament. The proceedings of Parliament are ordinarily conducted in the English language, but a member may exercise the option to address the House in any of the major languages if it is accompanied by an English translation. It is permissible for a member to say a phrase or in another language, provided he accompanies it with an English translation. Unfortunately, where a phrase in another language has been used, the legislators themselves are given the task or responsibility to provide their own translation. The state's responsibility here is ignored or disowned, contrary to the spirit of Article 21 of the Constitution. Significantly, the Constitution also acknowledges Ghana's multilingual realities and the restricted access to the official language through certain key clauses that compel the provision of language assistance in situations where human rights violations are imminent. The above summary indicates a notable lack of clarity in Ghana's official policy on language in Parliament. Whereas the requirement for English is clear, there is considerable equivocation about local language tolerance, which yields to systemic censorship, since the Herculean burden of translation is shifted from the state to the unskilled legislator himself. It simply means you may speak a local language in Parliament at the risk of exposing your handicap in the technical skills of translation. Oh, how I wish those who make parliamentary submissions in English are also mandated to translate into Ghanaian languages. Kabeyere. Yet, the potential for structural censorship could be mitigated, as was done during the Consultative Assembly sittings in 1991-92, where state-sponsored infrastructure for translation was utilized. In the absence of this, our Constitution gives free speech with one hand, only for the standing orders to frustrate its realization. One need not go beyond Africa to exemplify greater heritage tolerance in the standing orders of Parliament. In South Africa, parliamentary proceedings can be conducted in any of the 12 official languages, English plus Afrikaans, Xhosa, Zulu, and so on, with English being the most commonly used. Translation services are also available to accommodate other speakers. In Zimbabwe, that's another example, which accommodates 16 official languages, which are then translated as required by their 2013 constitution. Tanzania uses the national language of Swahili, but also, I'm sure you are aware that Kenya uses both English but permits Swahili. Of equal concern to us is the prohibition of prepared speech in Parliament. According to the standing orders, a member of Parliament is not permitted to read his speech in the House except a maiden speech. Apart from your maiden speech, you cannot read. This is unfair and likely to censure members of the House whose proficiency in English and command of their debate subject matter may not qualify them to intelligently participate in spontaneous exchanges. English is not our first language, and rather than risk humiliation, does a timid member of the House have any other alternative but recoil in silence? It was not surprising, as I wind up, that in 2016, some newspapers published names and pictures of members of Parliament who did not make a single statement on the floor of Parliament over a period of 4 years. That observation was made without equal reference to unfair regulatory restrictions within the chamber. MPs on their own knowing the value of further education to enable them participate in parliamentary discourse, have quietly sought to improve their relevance in the chamber by updating their academic and professional profile over the years. I conclude this lecture through a cursory look at the dynamics of academic profile within the chamber as from the beginning of the Fourth Republic, 1993 to date. The percentage of parliamentarians holding at least a bachelor's degree was 46% in 1993-97 constitution period. That's the first session. It was 46% in parliament holding at least a bachelor's degree. As of the 8th parliament, which recently ended, this had more than doubled to 96%, representing an increase of 109% from 1993-97. In the case of those with PhDs over their minimum bachelors, the outcome is equally significant. The Fourth Republic started in 1993-97 with as high as 12% PhDs, which dropped sharply to 7% in 1997-01 parliament. The percentage fluctuated through 7 other parliaments and came to 11 in the 8th parliament recently ending. The initial 12% in 1993 has since not been matched and is currently 11%. Conversely, there has been a major drop in the percentage of those possessing pre-tertiary certification at their highest. For example, whereas in 1993, pre-tertiary legislators, those who had middle school living certificate only, or high school only, or diploma only, were a little over 50%. This sharply dropped to 4% only as of the last parliament. No one in that parliament held just a basic school certificate, and no legislator was stark non-literate. The academic profile of parliament has generally risen over the years. Similarly, there has been a growing percentage of professionals, of which lawyers and teachers have dominated. Others are medical doctors, chartered accountants, pharmacists, and business entrepreneurs. The generally upward swing in academic certification and professionals may mean attempts are being made by legislators to position themselves to more actively participate in house business. Additionally, even though electorates are largely non-literate, they see in the academic qualification the political capital needed to enhance community access to development projects. The current happenings in this parliament, this one, clearly affirm the spirit of this presentation, where language of parliament has frequently come up, and people have been more and more sensitive to the proficiency in English language. Not only have tongue slips and deficiencies in English grammar been greeted with heckling in the chamber, members of the public have also taunted legislators that demonstrate low proficiency in English. See a few comments in the social media in response to language use in parliament based on recent events. Bakose Brofunti MP Biaka Konwem Ajise Greda. Due to low proficiency in English, one MP is stuck to his seat. Only an earth-moving equipment can move him. Another says, Brofu Boni dear, enebe TB. Today we are likely to hear some bad English. But listen to this interesting observation made by the former Deputy Minister for Formation. He said, English language has shrunk the majority in parliament into a minority. Did you hear that? You understand it? I'm sure it's clear. I don't want to go further. Let the nation take up the issue of liberalizing language, my last paragraph, in Ghana's parliament, through translation facilities to give true meaning to constitutional democracy and free speech. As we mourn Akua Donkor, that the efforts to pivot the indigenization of our parliament not be slammed. Ghana started the process in 1990s. But in 2003, we demolished translation booths without a single voice of protest from anybody, and thereafter subjected the needless ridicule, flawed attempts to speak the Queen's language. Let's humbly pick up the debris from the vandalism we dealt to democracy and construct a state-of-the-art infrastructure to accommodate the people's voices and entrench true democracy. And let it be said that a lone voice from a remote village of Ingenuity, whom we initially deprecated as a laughing stock, was indeed a true advocate of linguistic liberation. On the occasion of Ghana's 68th independence anniversary, let's truly liberate the local tongue in the exercise of free speech. Concluding, let's hear this lady chief, just a minute, from the central region, who sums up everything we have said today.
My name is Nana Nkanuma Akua Donkor, Chief of Ingenuity Shama Traditional Council. We can do so many things, but because of you people holding PhD and so DD, and we don't have that PhD and degree and of all those, that is why you cannot talk. If you people are going to allow us with our own Ghanaian language, maybe we can talk so many things. But this PhD. Why? But anytime they wanted to make this program, they should make it in our own language, French language, so that we can express our sense and emotion. What is happening? You want simple order that can grow from the end of Gaza. Now, what's the okay to be able to put in an answer with it?
Let's give you a round of applause. Let's end the talk. Thank you.